Hello everyone. So I'm going to talk about the Indigenous Movement and how there's a movement right now and they're fighting for and why they're fighting for this with this movement. In 1968, members of the Native American community united for a meeting to discuss many concerns that Indian people were facing on an everyday basis. Among these issues were the federal government's policies concerning American Indians that created high unemployment rates and police brutality. In 1968, while the Black Panthers fought for the Civil Rights Movement, Indian activists in Minneapolis formed the American Indian Movement, named AIM, in order to address Indian sovereignty issues. And from this gathering came the birth of the American Indian Civil Rights Movement and the emergence of Native American leaders such as Dennis Banks, Clyde Bulcourt, Ni Ga Ni Widu, and many others who knew that AIM would become the organization which constructed a victorious fight for Native Americans. It began as American Indians started to stand against government, oppression, atrocities, and corruption. The movement was created in order to reverse the disastrous policies of the United States, Canada, and other colonialist governments of Central and South America. In one of its first major actions in 1972, AIM led a nationwide caravan called the Trail of Broken Treaties. That concluded in the occupations of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, BI-8 headquarters in Washington, D.C. AIM brought Native Nation representatives to Washington and presented the Trail of Broken Treaties that had 20 points, and is called the 20 Points Indian Manifesto. And I have 20 of them, but I'm not gonna go through all of them, so I'm just gonna go through some. Number 3, it's Indian leaders to address Congress. Number 4, review of treaty commitments and violations. Number 7, relief for Native nations for treaty rights violations. Number 10, restoration of 110 million acres of land taken away from Native nations by the United States. 14, abolishment of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. 18, Indian religious freedom and cultural integrity protected. Number 20, reclaim and affirm health, housing, employment, economic development, and education for all Indian people. So years later, these 20 points still lay out the minimum of what has to happen if there is to be protection of native rights, and a future free from the dictators of the country, the United States, that surrounds the Native nations. AIM has since been fighting and continues to fight for the 20 points, as well as for the 1868 Sioux Treaty, which is still valid. According to the 1868 treaty, the Black Hills of South Dakota still belong to the Sioux people. They demanded that the federal government return the sacred Black Hills to them. To draw attention to their fight, there was a cross-country protest in the United States by American Indians. It was designated to make the populace aware of issues such as treaty rights, living standards, and inadequate housing. 8 organizations sponsored this cause. Over a century later, on February 27, 1973, AIM activists alongside the Oglala Lakota people of the Sioux Nation made an ultimate uprising for Native rights by occupying the village of Wounded Knee on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. The grassroots protest brought to light the inequity and employment of Indian people and demanded an impeachment of President Richard Nixon. They also protested against the United States government's failure to carry out treaties with the Indian peoples and demanded the reopening of all treaty negotiations. The Oglala and AIM activists supervised Wounded Knee for while the United States Marshal Services, Federal Bureau of Investigations agents, and other law enforcement agencies segregated the area. For the first time in many decades, Oglala Sioux occupied, free from government interference. Of course, the Bureau of Indian Affairs at the Pine Ridge Reservation was selling off land and rights to mining companies who were poisoning the land and people, causing birth defects and more. This motivated the American Indian Movement and over 200 Oglala people to help take over the Wounded Knee. The activists felt the need to make a statement by choosing the site of the 1890 Wounded Knee massacre, where Sioux men, women, and children were murdered, as well as to memorize the 1868 Sioux Treaty. After a 71-day standoff, the police, FBI, and the U.S. military fired 500,000 rounds of ammunition at the entrenched Indian encampment, killing 2 AIM members, 1 Cherokee, and 1 Oglala. Additionally, Ray Robinson, a civil rights activist who joined the protesters, vanished into thin air during the events and was believed to have been murdered. Following this event, the FBI determined to destroy AIM and leaders like Leonard Poultier. He became one of America's most well-known political prisoners due to the outcome of one of the most infamous political frame-ups in the modern U.S. history. He was convicted of assassinating 2 FBI agents on the Pine Ridge Reservation in 1975. He knew that he wouldn't receive a fair trial in the U.S. and fled to Canada, where Mounties arrested him in 1976. Despite their failure to produce witnesses who could identify Poultier as the gunman who killed the agents, the jury found him guilty and he was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. Poultier was a leading member in the struggle and also participated in actions against racism in the Vietnam War. Today, the plundering and oppression continues. First Nations have experienced nothing but a history of colonization, which has resulted in the theft of land, lack of resources, and unequal funding for services such as education and housing. Furthermore, Canada has become one of the wealthiest countries in the world by using the land resources, mining, logging, and oil drilling. An organization called Idle No More affirms that all past treaties cannot be broken and need to be honored. Current treaty agreements demand that First Nation peoples will share the land but retain their rights to land and resources. Currently, the U.S. government is attempting to pass laws in order to reserve land so they can be bought and sold by big companies that will get massive profits from the resources on the land. These laws not only prevent Indian nations the land that is rightfully theirs, but pollute the lands as well with projects such as the Keystone XL pipeline. It's a fact that the Keystone XL pipeline is harmful to people. Big oil storage tanks get lined up around downtowns and shopping strips. Having a pipeline run through populated areas is not safe. TransCanada plans to dig a trench and spend $7 million to make a 1,700-mile stretch of the pipeline and use energy extraction methods that are poisoning groundwater. Organizations like Idle No More are fighting against this oppression globally to protect indigenous sovereignty, air, land, and all creation for their future generations. They worry of the pipelines that could be destroying lands everywhere. Idle No More's World Day of Action took place in Canada and spread to Nebraska, Colorado, and other states. On January 28th of this year, the Day of Action protested the attacks on Indigenous peoples, human rights, sovereignty, and the health of their environment. The World Day of Action has become a multinational movement and the largest uprising in Canada for solidarity around the world. Additionally, rallies and teach-ins have been held to spread awareness about new legislations regarding the violation of treaty rights and environment protections. One example of an atrocity that the movement brought awareness to is the massive, outrageous budget Bill C-45, which later became law. This law now makes it easier for companies to exploit the natural resources in tribal areas and facilities. The Navajo area, the Navajo are one of the most affected by the corporate greed and environmental degradation in the U.S. The Four Corners area of New Mexico is the only place in the United States where 4 states come together and is one of the most impoverished areas in the country and is a predominantly Navajo. Their biggest concern lies on lack of electricity and running water. They also lack healthcare for the elderly, women, and children. In addition, education is limited or sometimes even non-existent. They also suffer from health problems. Power plants are among the top 10 producers of carbon dioxide in the United States West. The Navajo Nation rests on the country's largest reservation with 5 power plants. The pollution has undoubtedly given the people cancer, asthma, and other respiratory conditions. According to the EPA, research has shown when coal is burned, carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen, oxides, and mercury compounds are released to the air. Those featherweight molecules can be connected to serious health problems, including premature death. Meanwhile, local, state, and federal health agencies say they cannot carry precise health studies to confirm the tribe's complaints because the sample size will be too small. This is just another of many examples of the greediness and the exploitation caused by capitalism as a whole. AIM has repeatedly brought successful suits against the federal government for the protection of their rights. But the native peoples of this country, by far and large, have a long way to go before justice is achieved. We in the PSL stand in solidarity with our native sisters and brothers who are leading a resurgence in the movement of Indigenous rights. The Party for Socialism and Liberation agrees on how essential this task is for revolutionaries and progressives in the country. All First Nations deserve the most basic elements and deserve the right to land and resources like water, air for the future. A future where no one is neglected, starved, or harmed. Thank you.